Okay, I want to bring you back in time. So imagine you're a fly on the wall in this office, and there's 4 chairs in front of a big, old, probably oak desk with a leather top. And the walls are all brown, with the dark paneling, late 80s, early 90s, and on the walls are the certificates from this med school and that. You're obviously in a doctor's office. And in the 4 chairs, there's 3 people sitting there. There's no doctor. He hasn't obviously arrived, and they're obviously waiting on the doctor. Um, in the right chair is an older man, but he's not real old by any means. Maybe his early 70s, probably not. He's probably in his late 60s. And when you looked at him, you knew his dark hair that was turning gray, and his face was brown, and his skin showed every sign of spending a lot of time out in the sun. His hands were calloused. He was weathered. He was very weathered. And he sat in the chair, and he had his hat in his hand, and he didn't say anything. He just nervously worked the brim of his hat around in his hands. And then beside him was a slightly younger woman, but much smaller. She too had black hair with the roots turning gray, and just a small woman, a dress that was fairly out of date, but still you could look at her too, and you knew that she'd spent enough hard days outside, woman. And she sat in her chair, and she had a white handkerchief with red embroidery around it that you would never see anymore. And that was in one hand, and the other hand is a rosary. And she's just working the beads through, and you don't see her lips move, but she's obviously praying. Next to her is this much younger man. Now, that's a bit confusing because he looks just like the older man. The problem is he looks too young to be his son and too old to be his grandson. And he was sitting there occupying himself, reading a magazine, trying to pass the time. And all at once, the older man, he stops moving his hat, and he puts it aside, and he touches the woman on her knee, and he says, "Hey, Dort, why are we here?" And the woman says, "Paul, well, we're here at the doctor's office. We need to find out if I'm sick or not." Immediately, the older man is way more upset than you would expect someone to be who should have known where he was. "Oh, surely not." And he stood up, and he was fidgeting and couldn't stop talking, and "Surely not, surely not." And the woman, she instantly puts down her rosary and jumps up and says, "Paul, it'll be okay." And the young man puts down his magazine, and he comes over, and he too tries to get Paul settled down, and eventually the woman and the young man get the older man settled down, and he sits back down, and he resumes working his hat in his hands. And the woman sits down, and she picks up her handkerchief and her rosary, and she resumes praying her rosary. And the young man goes and sits down, and he resumes reading his magazine. And then it seems like a much longer time, but you know how time goes pretty slow when you're just waiting. And all at once, eventually you hear the old man stop fidgeting with his hat and tap the woman on her knee and say, "Dort, why are we here?" And the whole scene starts over again. And eventually, though, they get him settled down, and finally, before it happens again, the doctor walks in. Now, the doctor, he's way too young for that couple, the way it seems. He's got long hair. He honestly looks like he put on his white coat, shortly after he left Woodstock and took a shower. He sits down facing all 3 of them, and he makes some small talk, and he's obviously a kind of nervous. And after a little small talk, he finally looks the woman in the face, and he says, "Dorothy, there's no test for it. exactly, but I've asked you a lot of questions, and you know we spent a lot of time talking. I'm sure that you have early onset Alzheimer's. And the woman, the little woman, she puts her face in her hands for a little bit, and the older man says, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And you hear her sniffling a little, and then she blows her nose into that handkerchief that was way too pretty to be used for that, and she looks up, and she looks at the doctor and says, "Okay, so what do we do now?" Well, let's move ahead a little bit of time now. Now Dorothy is at a small assisted living home. You would stop, and I would stop often every day, and you know, hey mom, you want to work on a puzzle? Yes. Hey mom, you want to play some two-handed euchre? Yes. And I'd say, hey, you want me to read you something out of my Bible? Yes. And you want to go get ice cream? And she would say yes, sometimes 3 times a day as different children would come to visit her. But yeah, she said yes all the time. But then you move forward a little bit, and now mom, she couldn't stay in the gals' home anymore. So she's at Briarwood, and they treat her wonderfully. And Briarwood's still right there in Coldwater, still right on the way, and I can stop and see her almost every day. And then it was still the same mom, but you know, when you asked her if she wanted to put together a puzzle, she still always said yes. Or if you said, hey, you want me to read you something out of the Bible? And she still always said yes. It was just a different Bible. And you asked her if she wanted to play some rummy, and she would say yes. And you asked her if she wanted to go get ice cream, and she would say yes if they had the little cups in the. And then I got in a habit of, my mom loved to dance, and when I came to visit her in the morning, she was always in this open activities area. And you know, you should get people up out of their chair, right? So before I left every day, I would get her up out of the chair, and I'm not that shy a person, so I'd say, Mom, let's dance. And I would take her in my arms, and I would sing one of her favorite songs, and I'm sure you all know it. And I would sing loud enough that everybody in the activity center could sing along if they wanted to, and sometimes they did. And the people in the nursing home got quite fond of this, but we would dance to Could I Have This Dance for the Rest of My Life? Would you be my partner every night? And when we're together it feels so right. Could I have this dance for the rest of my life? Well, I'm very glad that a young guy dancing with his older mom, who was cute because I obviously can't sing, but and then I would sit her down in a chair, and I'd put on my coat and go down the long hall that would lead there. And this went on literally for years. And as time went on, you know, things change. So you would come and see mom, and it would be, hey mom, you want to put together a puzzle? And then it was, would you like me to tell you a Bible story? Or would you like to play some high-low? Mom would say yes, and she would say yes, and she would say yes. And if they had ice cream, you could ask if you want some ice cream, and she always said yes. And then one day came time to leave, and I got mom up out of the chair, and I would dance with her as I always had, and I'm not going to make you listen to me sing again. And sure enough, I sat her down and put on my coat, and I'm walking down that long hallway to leave, and I hear my mom say to the aide, who was with her, who was that young man? And, you know, the aide paid no attention to my mom. She literally ran down the hall because I'd been doing this for years. And she knew I'd heard because I stopped and turned around. And she catches up and she looks at me and she has tears in her eyes. And she said, Dan, are you okay? I don't know how, but for some reason I felt great. And I said, yeah, I'm fine. My mom is 80 some years old and not afraid to dance with a young guy she doesn't know. By now I wasn't so young anymore either, but what's to be sad about? So the thing is, why did I tell you that story? It's because my mom captured almost all the keys to living a thriving life in that story. So we're going to go back and talk about it. You know, first of all, key number one, she loved people. Now, Dad was not an easy person to take care of. She was Dad's caregiver, and Dad had some problems since his mid-50s, and he didn't always treat her very well. But she still was there. She was the one who calmed him down, and she was at the doctor's appointment to find out if she had early onset Alzheimer's or not, and he obviously did already. So, Mom just loved people. Everyone. You know what? It doesn't matter if you're an individual or a company, if you're leading an organization and you don't love the people you're leading, it's a big problem. If you're an individual, you're not going to be happy if you don't love people. Number two, my mom did not have to be coerced or pushed into going to see this doctor. She wanted to go. She thought something was wrong and she wanted to find out the truth. Key number two, you've got to seek, face, and deal with the truth. Then when she gets the truth, she takes 10 to 20 seconds to put her face in her hands and tear up that pretty handkerchief a little bit and then look up and said, so what do we do now? Key number three, don't ever let yourself feel like a victim. You know, she gave herself just a few minutes, and I doubt very many of us could sit there with our spouse having early onset Alzheimer's and you have it for yourself and not feel like you're a victim. But you see, once you're a victim, then victims can't do anything about their situation. A victim is helpless. Don't let yourself feel that way. She felt sorry for herself for a grand total of 20 seconds max. Then she went on to key number four. She lifted her head up and said, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? You look at the situation, you face the truth as it is, and you take action. You can't sit around and wonder and try to make the perfect decision and think and worry and do nothing. You get nowhere when you do nothing. It took her 20 seconds to look that young doctor straight in the eye, and you should have seen the shock on his face when her answer was, okay, what do we do now? Have a strong bias for action in your life. Then she ends up in different nursing homes. Now, my dad, he went to the nursing home, and I love my dad, but he never accepted where he was. He fell apart. He didn't do the best he could in the situation he was in, and he died in 6 months. And they were 6 bad months. Mom lived years. And I'm telling you, my mom's time between when she found out she had Alzheimer's and when she finally passed away, I think were the best years for life. She was happy. She played the hand she was dealt. Okay? She accepted her situation. She took action. She did the best. But what it really was she was living for a purpose. You see, in her mind, mom's job was to honor God and deal with whatever he gave her and deal with it well. And she did. She lived up to that purpose. So the next key, you've got to live with a purpose, a noble purpose. Then, you heard my mom, she said yes to ice cream and yes to puzzles and yes to folding laundry and yes to dancing with a young person she didn't know. She loved doing all those things, by the way. When somebody asks you to do something that you love, say yes. Lastly, when mom danced with that young man she didn't know, so many people in her situation would have sheltered themselves because they were afraid. They would have said no because they were afraid. Fear is a thief. It keeps you from so many things. Another key is don't let fear rob you of anything. Don't listen to the critic on your shoulder. Don't be afraid. If that woman in her 80s who doesn't know where she's at or what she's doing or who she's with will say yes to dancing with a young man, we all can say yes a lot more often. So those are the keys. And my mom lived them fantastically. And I learned so much from her, and I hope you did too. So life's never going to be a walk in the park, so don't go on a walk. Go on an adventure. Thank you.